Good morning, everybody. We're going to have a look at the selection statements and selection in general, again using VB.NET. For starters, we're going to have a look at the comparison operators, the if-then statement in VB, and then the if-then-else statement as well. I'm going to use a bit of documentation from Tutorials Point, just because they've explained everything to my satisfaction. Right at the start, we need to then have a look at the different operators available. We've got the following operators normally in all the programming languages. There's first of all an equal to operator to test whether two values are equal or not. So if we assume there's a variable called a that stores 10 and a variable b that stores 20, then I can test whether they store the same value, and currently this would be false. Important, all these comparison operators will always give us a true or a false result. An if statement needs to use the true or the false. So if I want to store or test if two values store the same value, I can use the equal to operator. Something like this. The brackets are optional that you see. I can also test for not equal to. The operator in VB would be a bigger than and then a smaller than sign. This signifies not equal to. So if I test is A not equal to B, it would be true because 10 is not equal to 20. Remember, A and B stores the values 10 and 20. I can test for bigger than or then greater than. So if I test A bigger than B, so 10 bigger than 20, it would be not true, false. I can check for less than. So is A less than B, 10 less than 20, and that would be true. We can test for bigger or equal to, greater than or equal to. A bigger or equal to B would be false. And I can test for less than or equal to. So is A less or equal to B would be true. At a later stage, there's some other operators that we can add to the list, but for simplicity, we're going to start with the operators that we see over here. If we then continue with the decision making, the selection statements in VB.NET, then important to know that the decision statement allow the program now to either take one path or another, depending on a certain condition, bigger than, equal to, smaller than, whatever you need to test. So we're going to have a test, and either one path would be taken or another. Okay, so important to know that. I then have quite a few statements that we can use. For simplicity, we're going to start with the if-then statement. And herewith, we've got an example. I need the reserved word if, then, and end if. I'm going to test a condition, so one variable against another, or one variable against the literal value. And if this evaluates to true, there's a number of statements that we can execute. So, if we test, if the variable a stores a value less or equal to 20, if this is true, we want to add 1 to c. And this is all this statement does. So it tests one variable. Here it tests it against a, what we call literal, a fixed value. So is a, does it store something less or equal to 20? If that's the case, add 1 to c. So now, if a stores 10, for example, the program will evaluate 10 less or equal to 20 is true, and it's going to execute the statement, then get to the end, thereafter continue with the statements after the if statement. If a, though, stored 30, this program will execute 30 bigger or equal to 20 would be false, and if this condition evaluates to false, it would jump immediately to end if, bypass the add 1 to c, and then continue with the statements thereafter. So very often a flow diagram shows us exactly what would happen. So we test the condition. This test that we've got over there is signified by the diamond that you can see over there in the flow diagram. If the condition is true, we're going to add 1 to c. That's my conditional code. Thereafter, the program will continue. If the condition evaluated to false, we're simply not going to do anything and continue with the rest of the program. The code after the end if. This line that joins here signifies the end if. So over here is an example. Imagine this is a button event procedure. This is just a main method. It works exactly the same as a button event procedure, except this program here displays data at the command prompt and not in a label. So we've got a variable called a, and we're not asking the user for a value. We just want to show you what would happen. So we assign 10 to a immediately. And now I've got the if statement, the VB code, to test if a stores a value less than 20. So this will be executed, and it's going to check 10 less than 20 because a stores 10. It would be true. Then it's going to execute this line that displays on the screen a is less than 20. It gets to the end if, and now it displays the value of a is 10. That's what that line would do. This just stops the program, and this ends the piece of code. So it would have this effect in the output. Let's assume we execute this program again, but this time around 30 is stored in a. Program will execute this and now test 30 less than 20. It would be a false. False specifies go immediately to end if and continue with the code after that. So only the value is 30 will be displayed. And this code over here will not be executed at all. If we go to the demonstration of the code, it's just a VB editor compiler environment, and we can now edit whatever we want to. So let's say we wanted to test if something is less than 50. We can add our own code. I can just click execute at this stage, and it takes a moment and it gives me my result. A is less than 50. The value of a would be that. If I now go and change this to 66, I can run this again. And now the only output that I get is the value of A is 66. An online environment like this is real nice and easy because I can test if my one statement executes perfectly fine. So over here we check the Boolean condition. I'm just removing some of the code. This is just an output message. I can add another one. Let's just for simplicity go and copy the code, and here we say statement after the if. I don't display anything like that. So now if I run this again, I will have two lines in the output. Statement after if and the value of A is 66. Why did this happen? The program assigned 66 to a variable called A. Over here, tested is A less than 50, and it would be false because 66 less than 50 is false. Thus the code would immediately jump to the end if and execute the rest of these statements. The read line statement is needed in this section to just stop the code so that we can see the output. We don't need that for a GUI program. Okay, so when I only have one if statement, I can test a certain condition. I can have more than one statement. Over here I'm just repeating all of the output. So if I assign 12 to A and execute this code, I get 1, 2, 3, 4 lines that says the value is less than A. Why? I had 4 lines here. I copied it to show you that more than one statement is needed. And then after that is executed, all the other statements after end if would execute. So there we go with the rest. And again, if I had something like 120, I execute this code, then we only have a part of the execution of the output because this part over here doesn't execute at all. If I now go have a look at the second if statement, if then with an optional else, then it works like this. I still have the if, I still have my Boolean expression. Boolean expression just means it needs a true or a false result. I still have the reserved word then that must be used. And now I can have one or more statements. They will execute when this Boolean condition will be true. I now also have an optional else that I can use, and these will execute when the Boolean expression would be false. So now if I go have a look, we'll end the if statement. So now I've got a test and I've got statements to execute if the code is true and other statements to execute if that condition is false. And then all will join up when we get to the end if and continue along one line. So over here I can test again a variable. This time I can display a message whether if this condition is true, or I can display another message if the condition would be false. Again, let's go have a look. at an example. They've got some comments over here that I'm just gonna delete, and I want to leave a line open. So here we've got a variable again called a. Remember, this is not a good name for a variable. This is just simply an example, and currently it stores 100. Our if statement tests if a is less than 20. It displays either a message a is less than 20 or a is not less than 20, the value of a. So again, we can add console.writeLine. Let's just statement after the if. So if I execute the code, then over here is my output. First of all, the code will test a less than 20, so 100 less than 20, and it's going to jump to this part over there. A is not less than 20. This test is false. False means go to else and then do all the statements over there. When you get to end if, the if statement stops and all the statements thereafter would be executed. Readline simply stops this program, the console program, for me. Okay, and my output is something like this. If I now change the value of a to 20, what's going to happen? We can already think. So a less than 20, is 20 less than 20? No, it's false. So that means the else statements would execute, and I'm just going to duplicate those statements because all the statements between else and end if would execute. So in this case, I'm going to have two lines in the output that say a is not less than 20, and then thereafter the statements after the if statement. If I change the value of a to minus 55 and click on execute again, then we have the line that executes that say a is less than 20, because my condition will now test a less than 20 minus 55. Is that less than 20? It's true. Whenever I've got a true condition, the statements after the then would execute, and there is currently only one. Again, I can just to do something a little bit quick, copy and paste those statements. Oops. So over there, let's have 3 statements. So if I click execute again, all 3 statements would execute, and I've got 3 lines that says a is less than 20, and then thereafter it immediately jumps to the statements after the if statement. So quite important for you or for me that you realize we are going to test something, and now either the true statement condition code would execute. Otherwise, if the condition tests false, the code after the else will execute. Thereafter, everything would join up, and the code after end if would execute further. We can play around and change this condition just to practice different scenarios. So what's going to happen if a stores 20 on the dot, and my if statement tests if a is less or equal to 20. Then again, the statements in the true section will execute. Why? 20, is that less or equal to 20, would be true. That means these statements would execute, and when they are done, the lines that are bold over there would execute. Okay, so this is the if statement then. We've got two options for now. Either I've got an if statement with a condition, statements to execute when the Boolean condition is true, and else, it's optional, and then statements to execute if the Boolean condition is false. Or then I've got an if statement, and this if statement would execute no else is coded, just if my condition, then one or many statements, and an end if, to do only something when the condition is true. So now the first job that I've got for you is to go to Vutela. Okay, we can go to Vutela. Unit 3 selection is now available. Currently only lesson 1 basic selection is available. And if we go to the exercises, there are quite a few different programs that's specified. And we've got if statements in all of them. Here the program 29 says get two numbers from the user, determine the smallest number and display it. And there must be a function determine smallest that gets two numbers, and it's returning the smallest of the two. And I may not use any of the math functions, so I need to use an if statement in this function to determine the smallest value and return it. So there's quite a few if statements over here, all that deals with the if then or if then else that was discussed just now, and we need to have a look at those. So look at these and think how you would write the if statement only. In the next demonstration, I'm going to show you how we're going to do the planning of these programs.